Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ACEC Research Institute's Future of Engineering Roundtable Series. In today's session, insights from year 2 of the Diversity Roadmap benchmarking tool. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping announcements. For the easiest view, move your mouse to the top of your screen and select Gallery View. This will allow you to see all panelists. Your microphone was muted upon entry, but if you wish to ask a question or offer a comment, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer as many questions as time permits. This event is open to the media, and the press is invited to participate, as with our other attendees, by asking a question through the Q&A box. We are also recording today's event for future viewing. If you require any technical assistance, please feel free to send a message to ACEC Research Institute privately through the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to assist you. Now allow me to introduce the Executive Director of the ACEC Research Institute, Daphne Bryant, who would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Carrie, and good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to be with you today and talk about the outcome of the Diversity Roadmap. And this is our benchmarking tool. And we are looking forward to sharing some of the results from the report of the second year. This data is reflective of data that was the full year of 2023 that was put in 2024. And so Joe Bates is with us, our senior research consultant. He's going to share some data with you, serve as our moderator, and we have a great panel of industry executives with us representing both firms and the consultancy side. And so we have with us Lisa and Keith and Chad. I'm going to go ahead, Joe, and turn it over to you so you guys can get started, because I know you have a lot of great data to share.
Thanks, Daphne. Yeah, we have a lot of information today, so I'm going to first ask each of the panelists to give us just a very brief introduction about themselves and their firms. And the structure of our webinar today will be that I'm going to present some data from the actual results of year 2 and compare those to year 1. And then we'll have a discussion with the panelists after each section of data that I share. So with that, Lisa?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us to hear this important research. I'm Lisa Brothers. I'm president and CEO of Niche Engineering. Our headquarters are in Boston, Massachusetts. We have offices in DC and in Richmond. We have about 130 people at our company. And we've done the Diversity Roadmap both years that it's been open for data collection.
Great. Thanks for being with us today, Lisa. And Keith.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Keith Fox. I am principal of Fox STEM. We are a civil engineering company headquartered here in the Navy Yard neighborhood of Washington, D.C. We operate primarily in transportation, water, and energy spaces. We have 20 to 25 people, and just happy to be here and participate. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Keith. So Lisa, you're sort of the mid-sized firm representative here, and Keith, you're the small firm, quote unquote. And then we have Chad from Zweig Group, who actually is the sponsor of the Diversity Roadmap. Chad, would you like to give a few words about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Yeah, Chad Kleinens. I'm president and CEO of Zweig Group, and we are a business research and analytics training and advisory company to AEC firms. My background is actually as a civil engineer. I spent a number of years in design of primarily large infrastructure, transportation, aviation, and water. And just as soon as I could, I got onto the business and strategy side, which ultimately led me to join Zweig Group about 12 years ago. And so today I plan to bring kind of a bigger picture perspective, as I don't have I'm not working inside of a firm, but we work with many firms every day, just like the firms that are in this call.
Thanks, Chad. It's really good to have everybody here today. So I'm going to jump right to it. We're going to go into an overview of the Diversity Roadmap just briefly here, just to set the stage for you all. There's 4 sections to the Diversity Roadmap, which are scored. Those are the workplace, workforce, marketplace, and supplier community. So those are the 4 pieces we'll talk about in a little bit of detail today. And then there's another section which is not scored, but it is regarding the firm profile. So where is the firm located? How many individuals are at the firm, etc. as well as the employee demographics, which is a very important part of this tool. We won't be getting into that detail today, but in the report, there is more detail about all of these sections and some of the sections that we won't be able to cover today. When we talk about the diversity roadmap, we do talk about the scoring. And so I want to briefly cover that. The best score you can receive is in what we call the optimizing section. This is the highest level. You have scored between 85% and 100% overall. You may have a lower score in one section and higher scores in other sections, but this is your overall score. And these numbers also apply to the scores within each of the sections. So that's how the roadmap works, is that you get a score for each of those 4 sections that I mentioned on the previous slide, and then you'll get an overall score. The second level is managing. That is in the 70% to 84%. This is, consider you're doing a very good job, you're doing well, there's still some things you can improve. Of course, optimizing means that you are really ahead of the curve there. You're doing everything right, everything you can do, and maybe even more. Then there's the emerging, which means you have gotten a pretty good start and you're doing a lot of things, but there's a lot more yet to be done. And then the lowest level, which is aspiring. This is where you've taken the first steps, you've gotten started, but there's a lot of things you can do and a lot of opportunities for you at your firm. And that's a score below 55%. So there's 4 areas. Now I'd like to share with you the overall assessment results from the 2024 year as well as 2023. And as Daphne mentioned, 2024 year is based on reported data from 2023. So just keep that in mind. And then 2023 year is from 2022 reported year. So, but nonetheless, we do have year-over-year results, and you can see here that the average score increased 7 points. This is the overall assessment when you combine all 4 of those categories, and this is truly tremendous work here. What I did is I looked at the firms that participated in the first year as well as those who participated in the second year. And we see that about half of firms who participated this year also participated last year. So I looked at their results, compared it to the other half from this year, and there were no statistically significant and meaningful differences. So that's why we are very comfortable comparing year over year, even though we do have half of the firms are different this year. So that's another methodological note I wanted to keep or to mention to you all. So good news is that we're improving scores among those who have participated. We had roughly 170 firms participate this year. Not all of them answered all sections, so that's why they didn't have an overall score. And last year we had about 190, so just a little bit fewer this year than last year. One of the interesting things this year is that we do see score results differ by firm size. So smaller firms tend to get lower scores on average, and larger firms tend to have higher scores on average. So this is why I think it's important for us to hear from different firm sizes, and also from Chad, who has a broader perspective working with many different firms, to understand, what are they seeing, how are they addressing issues, and how are they advancing their programs. So with this, I'd like to just open up to the panelists. Lisa, let's start with you. What do you think about these initial results? Was this surprising to you when you saw it, or not?
No, having been with my company for 35 years and right from the beginning, I know when we were smaller, the 1 to 50 firms don't have the resources available. They don't have the HR people. They don't have the people in accounting to actually put some systems in place for tracking the stuff around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so I'm not surprised that they got lower scores than some of the firms who obviously have more resources and to be able to put some formal structure in place. So I'm not surprised at all by the scores. And I will say that just because the smaller firms are scoring lower doesn't mean they're not doing the work, which I think Keith will talk about. It really is, they're smaller, you can walk around and you can really make sure that you have impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you can have that really close contact. But I'm not at all surprised by the scores.
So Lisa, do you have an individual at your firm who really heads up the initiatives and oversees the diversity work?
We don't. So don't forget, we're mid-sized. We have 130 people. So in our firm, we're structured that obviously, it's really important for the CEO to be committed to it. Well, we have an EDI council, and I have two strong co-chairs on the council, which is the corporate that runs our ERGs and works with our HR manager. So it's not our HR manager trying to drive this. It's a separate EDI council made up of corporate people and some other younger people in the company. So we don't have one dedicated person.
Okay, great.
Because we're not big enough. I mean, I just can't support that person.
Right, right. So, and you have 120 people, which is, it's a fairly good number of
Yeah.
people, but still, it's, as you said, you need to be larger to really have one person dedicated. Keith, you're a smaller firm. You've got 20 to 25 people. You've been growing. You're only 4 years old, right? So how are you approaching this diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in your firm?
Yeah, I think that well, first of all, Lisa, thank you for the segue. I think that the management in smaller firms has a greater influence on the culture. And Lisa alluded to it, like I could walk out my office door and shout our values, and half of our staff will hear it and smile. But as a smaller company, we don't have a formal diversity roadmap plan. It's embedded in our culture. Our company's still small enough where we're agile and nimble enough to select people who resemble the values and the culture that we want to have here at FoxSTEM. And essentially, to Lisa's point, we don't have one person that's dedicated to this effort. But as she was speaking, I just thought about it. Our marketing person is probably the lead on these type of efforts. So what we're projecting is very important, and it's coming from one of the most important people in that regard. So
great. And Chad, you obviously have a more broader perspective. You're working with a lot of different clients. What do you think about these results? Does this resonate with you?
Yeah, it does. And I think, what I would say is if you're a smaller firm, don't be discouraged by this. I mean, the reality is when we do surveys and collect data, informal ways and success in this area is harder to measure. And I think Keith said it, I think, in a smaller firm, it doesn't have to be as formalized. When you get to larger firms, you have to have policies, procedures, structure, broad and vast communication to get 500 people in 50 offices to understand what your policy is and how to enforce it and how to get results. But in a smaller firm, as Keith said, you can walk out the door and say, this is who we are, and people can get it instantaneously.
Yeah, and I imagine, Keith, you're involved with every hiring decision as well. So you're able to keep the pulse on those individuals that you're bringing in, and again, ensuring that this is the firm, that culture that you want to promote. So now I'd like to move to the first scored section of the diversity roadmap, and this is called the workplace section. This section assesses how diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are integrated into your firm's culture. So you can see here, we also saw an increase in average scores by 8 points. So a very large improvement here overall. And still, we do see the majority of firms are aspiring, and we saw that with the overall results, but we're seeing more firms falling into the emerging category, which is the second level up from the bottom. The managing category is obviously much larger this year as well, and the percentage of optimizing increased from 1% to 5%. So it's still relatively small, but these are really meaningful improvements. We asked quite a few questions. I'm just going to share a few with you. The full report has more of the detail, and we'll share a QR code with you at the end of this session today so you can easily access the full report. In this question, we asked about whether your firm has a DEI&B strategy, and we did see an increase by 6 points in terms of the percentage of firms who have a formal DEI&B strategy. Some of that increase came from firms who were in progress and completed that strategy work, but we also see that there's slightly fewer firms who said no, they don't have a strategy at all. So here again, We do see that smaller firms are less likely to have a strategy in place, a formal strategy. And so larger firms are more likely to have that formal strategy in place. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute with the panel. We also asked this question about how is your leader at the firm, the president and CEO, are they consistently demonstrating their commitment to DEI and B by talking about its importance and fostering behaviors of inclusion? We saw a really good increase in the numbers here, came up to 77% from the prior year, so up quite a bit. Now, we do still see that the next level down of leaders in a firm are not as committed in terms of showing it actively like the firm leader. So there's still a difference there when you go one level down. And we saw that last year as well. And then the last slide I'll show you in this section are about the objectives. What are your primary objectives for your DEI and B strategy? And for the second year in a row, we see attracting and retaining diverse talent is the #1 objective for a firm's DEI and B strategy. And you can see on all of these areas increases over the prior year. So that's also good news. We also see expanding diversity at all levels of leadership, achieving better business results increase. So that's driving the bottom line, and a few other objectives here as well. So with that, Keith, I'd like to start with you this time. What are the goals of your firm, and have you formalized a strategy, or is it more informal at this stage?
Yeah, I'm going to start by saying it is not a formalized strategy, but one of the goals of our firm, being a small firm, is we always say we want to be the most preferred. We're not going to be the best. We're going to be the most preferred by our clients. We're going to be most preferred by other employees. And how do we do that? Essentially, it's in our mission and our values. And each one of our managers attempts informally to create this environment by building a welcoming workplace. In addition to that, we know that our clients also see they want to work with who they want to work with. If you meet the qualifications, now they're looking at the next level. Like, do we like this firm? Do we like what they stand? Do we like their values? Do we like what they're doing? And essentially, all of our managers are trained to know that aspect of the business also. So becoming the most preferred for our clients and for our employees is paramount, and it kind of resonates through everything that we talk about. And informally, it includes all the values that you'll see in DEI and B.
And Lisa, how about you? Have you all gotten to that point where you have a formal strategy and formal objectives?
I mean, I wouldn't say like it's a written document, but just like Heath, our overarching goal has always been to be a place where everyone feels respected, rewarded, and wants to show up and feel like they're included, right? Everybody has a fair shot on their career path to end up in senior management and be in a position where they obviously have every right to be. So for us, it's really the same thing. It's just ingrained in who we are, and everything we do, we look through the diversity, equity, inclusion lens with it. We have a lot of different systems in place. We track a lot of metrics. We share those metrics with everybody externally. All those things are really important. And I mentioned at the beginning that we've done this tool twice, both times that it's been open, because it's a maturity model. It's like, how do you actually start to maybe try to formalize that a little bit, right? Because you can say, okay, the first time I do it, I might be in the lowest category, but how do I move along that maturity model? And that will help formalize for some of those smaller firms and some of those other firms who don't really know how their path is going to get to where they want to be optimizing. And I just want to reiterate that everybody's path is different, and this work is never done. So even if you have a formal strategy, it's always moving and pivoting and changing along the way. And so there's always work to do around this. It's never like done. And so for us, that's why I don't really say we have a formal strategy, because it's always with us. It's everything that we do, and we move and pivot where we need to, obviously, to make sure that we're in the place we need to be as a company to be the place where people want to come and work. And obviously that will help with recruit, retain, all of those things that we need to do around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But the roadmap really is a way to start a little bit of that formal process.
And I think that's a great point you make, Lisa, that we call it the diversity roadmap because it is a roadmap. It should be used to help your firm advance your diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. And in the personalized reports that you get when you complete this diversity roadmap for your firm, it actually gives you, okay, here's where you are. Here's the next things you should be thinking about. And I think that's one of the really valuable aspects of this tool, is a way to help firms truly improve and advance their program. Chad, I want
Absolutely.
to ask, yeah, so Chad, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the more successful initiatives that you see your clients enacting when it comes to DEI&B programs?
Well, I think looking at all of the benefits that they offer their employees and designing those benefits or expanding them, modifying them, refining them around, the employee's needs, and I think it's, you've got to do assessments like this, or like the best firms to work for survey, some type of an employee experience survey on a regular basis. So you know what they need, because the reality is every firm is different. Every firm has a slightly different culture, and the initiative should be focused around what that specific culture needs. But we see a lot of higher scores in our employee experience surveys and like parental support initiatives that cover, both spouses and then student loan payback programs. Those tend to resonate across diverse employee groups. But again, I think it's important. It's different for every firm. And one more thing I'll just say is we're on this point and kind of tying to what Lisa said. It's not necessarily where you are; it's the direction you're going. And I think it's important to start somewhere. I think some leaders worry about doing assessments like this, or a hot firm list, or best firms to work for, because what if I'm in last place? Well, it's the direction you're going, and understanding those data points where you benchmark to Lisa's point there is, what do we need to do to move in the right direction?
Yeah. So Keith and Lisa, I'm really curious, what are some of the most successful initiatives that you have enacted at your firm regarding these types of initiatives, the DEI&B program, or even if it's not a formalized strategy, what are some of the things you're doing to promote the efforts?
I mean, one thing that we did just recently is that we have line resumes. That was something that we just initiated. We had to buy a software to be able to do that, but that was something that we really wanted to have happen. So we have a whole bunch of different level of people doing interviews. We also wanted to make sure that the interviewing process was inclusive, and we had a diverse group of people, younger people, people, middle managers, as well as some of the upper management, so that people get a diverse cross section of the company when they come in. And we talk about attracting and retaining. We're constantly looking at our benefits packages. We have a whole host of ERGs that we started out with one ERG. We just did a BIPOC ERG, just started a women's ERG, just started. We've had our DEI&B ERG for quite a long time, and that's an employee resource group. If people don't know what that is, that was a starting point for us. One of the other things that I think works really well for us is a tool called Community Circles, and it's run within one of our ERGs, where if there's a hot topic that's happening out in the world, it actually comes from Indigenous people, and you basically sit in a circle and you have a talking piece, and nobody else can talk except the person who has the talking piece, and you just pass it around, and whatever the topic is, people get to have their say, and you don't interrupt. And it's a very respectful environment. There's no phones, there's no lunch. And it's been a great way for people who want to talk about something that might be controversial to be able to sit in a room and just really just talk with each other about what they're feeling, and in a very safe environment. So those community circles have something that we hear about all the time, people really appreciate, and that's something that came out of one of our ERGs. So there's some of the different kinds of tools that we've used within our organization.
Those are great examples. Keith, what about you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to steal that community circles piece, Lisa. So thank you for that. With the talking piece.
Yeah.
It's a really great idea. As Lisa was talking, I was thinking about one of the ways that we've been able to exercise our diversity and get a diverse staff is by internships. And we don't go to the places where most firms in our region go for interns. I like to find the big fish in the small pond, and have had tremendous success with that. So we often get in interns, and even as a small company, I've had 3 interns in here, just building that experience so that they can see something else and imagine. I don't know if they're going to come work for Fox STEM, but I feel compelled to introduce them to an environment where they'll love engineering.
Well, I know from talking to my son, who's in his, last year at Virginia Tech in engineering, those internships really help a lot as well to get a job. And so that's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next section here, folks. We're going to talk about workforce next, and this section assesses employee recruitment and retention policies. So here in this section, we saw an increase on the average score by 5 points. And I think the biggest change here is the reduction in the number of aspiring. So we went from 85 to 71. So that's a really good move in the right direction. And the number of emerging went up to 19 from 13. From managing, it went from 2 to 9. Oh, it's a big increase there. And of course, we finally got to 1% on optimizing in this section. So a couple of the questions we asked are about the type of data that your firm gathers and how you're analyzing it. We see that the majority of firms, most of the firms participating in this study, they collect employee demographics, compensation, or other data required to comply with regulatory requirements. So that, of course, makes sense if it's required. There are also discrepancies in compensation rankings by gender, race, and or other dimensions of diversity. So that increased from 41 to 52. Discrepancies in promotions by gender, race, or other dimensions, that increased as well. Employee engagement, and discrepancy in performance rankings. So a lot of improvements here on this metric overall. And then we also asked about firms utilizing various recruiting practices. So obviously, Keith, you were mentioning internships, which is a great way to recruit as well as to give experience to individuals. But the number one there are 2 tied for number 1. It's utilizing multiple third-party websites to post open roles, as well as evaluating and writing job descriptions to remove bias. I think that's such an important thing because I know that there are people who unintentionally have integrated bias into those job descriptions when they might not have meant to do so. We also see hiring employees who require sponsorship to work in the U.S. That increased significantly, encouraging interview panels to be diverse, offering workplace benefits that are appealing. And I think this gets to what you were saying, Chad, that depends on the individuals at your firm. So there's a lot of different things here that firms are doing, and more firms are doing more of these things this year than last year. So my question for the panelists here, Chad, I'd like to start off with you on this one. How are you seeing firms collecting data, and do you have any examples of how firms are using data to further their DEI&B strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And it ties to one of my previous comments about, employee experience surveys. There's no shortage of those out there, whether it's a local best place to work, but of course we run the national best firms to work for, which is only focused on the industry. So what we get out of that is, and it's a very lengthy survey. It's one of those that you really only want your staff to take once a year, but it provides 137 different individual data points that you can then benchmark. And I think, again, it's super important to at least once a year have something that's consistent where you can say, okay, here's where we were on these data points last year, and here's where we are this year. What's working well, what's not working well, and let's employ strategies to constantly close those gaps, because there's always going to be gaps, and they're going to be a moving target, right? as the firm grows and evolves. And as you solve one problem, then you can focus on another. So I just think it's super important. And we've said it several times here, and it's reinforced by these very encouraging results here, is that you've got to start somewhere and you've got to move the right direction. And it's really great to see these results moving in that direction generally.
Lisa, what kind of data are you collecting? Again, I know you don't have an individual who oversees the program, but is that affecting your ability to collect and analyze data? And what type of data are you collecting and analyzing?
No, we definitely collect and analyze data, and we've been doing it for a long time. And then, obviously demographics and gender and ethnicity. We look at actually where our team comes from, different schools. At one point, we were hiring a lot from one particular school, and we were like, oh boy, we really want some diversity of education as part of the company too. So we have a whole bunch of demographics, and then we look at actually turnover by each department as well as the whole company, and then we look at underrepresented people. Is there any correlation between? Is there more people of one particular type of employee leaving the company? So really analyzing all that stuff. But we do at our year-end meeting, we're open book financials, so we share our financials with the entire company once a year. We talk about the high-level metrics with everybody in the company, and you can see year to year. The thing I will say for the smaller companies, again, if you have it's a couple of people can really make a big impact on the numbers. So you have to just kind of look at, I mean, you know, Joe, as a researcher, right? You got to figure out how big the pool is, what you're looking at, so to speak. But yeah, we're very transparent here. We share everything, and we really want our people to understand that we are doing work on this and we are being intentional on it. And we've been tracking and sharing since 2016 when we actually corporately decided to be more intentional around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. When my team told me, yeah, we do a great job, we're pretty diverse, but you know what, Lisa, we could do a better job and be more intentional. And that's when we started tracking all those metrics. So really important, and the team cares. The new generation really cares. They really want to understand what the company is all about, what we're trying to do, and how we are trying to continue on that path and that journey that we're all on, that, you know, ebbs and flows and does, hopefully points us in the right direction, as Chad said. So lots of different things that we share within the company for sure.
Great. And Keith, how about you? Obviously, it's going to be a little more challenging with fewer people, but what are some of the key points of data that you're looking at for your firm?
Yeah, well, I can tell you right now, we're probably just tracking total employee count. So we're still that size again, where, you know, I can walk out and kind of get a good. We do have something very similar to the community circle where we do have discussions with our employees, and again, small enough where we can get a sense of what folks are thinking, feeling, and some of their challenges, some of their expectations. So we haven't formalized anything on paper, but just being the size we are and, you know, understanding good management, we have to pay attention to our employees and what they're looking for and what their expectations are. And again, we've been able to adjust and adapt. So right now, just not collecting any data, but I wrote down a few things that Lisa said today, and she said her staff came to her and said, be more intentional. And so perhaps that's our next step again on the diversity roadmap.
Right.
I just want to say one thing that was really interesting as part of that intentionality was the whole discussion around job descriptions and how different people react to different job descriptions. And one of the first things we did on being more intentional, Keith, was we bought the software package that actually screens the job descriptions and screens the recruiting ads that makes them gender neutral. And so it was interesting. And then we went through all of our policies and changed all of our policies to make sure that they were, appropriate. And so that was some of the intentional upfront work we did, was looking at all of what we had in place for 20 years. How do we make sure that it's inclusive for everybody? And so, but yeah, that was a learning thing for me many years ago about how different people read, interpret job descriptions and what might be somebody else might go for, might put somebody else off. And so trying to make that much more neutral so we can track the most amount of people for sure.
That's really interesting. That's a good segue into the next question I had for you all, which is about your recruiting practices. I want to come back to you now, Keith, and then I'll go to Chad. But Keith, you mentioned that you like to look for people in places that maybe others aren't looking. What are some of the other things that you're finding are really helping your firm to grow and doing so through your recruiting practices?
Yeah. So again, I think I'm glad we have the small business perspective on here. I would say all of our employees except for 2 have come through referral. And that's just people working here saying, I know someone who would be a great fit. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean diversity, but if you have the right people recruiting on your behalf, they are sensitive to these things and they know what would be a good fit no matter what. And so what we found, and of course, we have a referral program where we reward folks for recruits. It's not a lot, but it's a nice check. And so that has probably been our most effective thing. And then the other thing you alluded to earlier, Joe, is that when I do get a recommendation, I'm able to make a phone call. I'm able to take them to get coffee. I'm able to go to lunch. I mean, I'm able to touch the person, learn about them learn about us, and make sure it's a great fit both ways. Again, those are the advantages of a small business.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And so, Chad, what are some of the more successful recruiting practices that you've seen or that you recommend?
Yeah, I would say that any program that encourages really turning all of your employees into ambassadors and recruiters. So just think about, and there's, employee referral programs have gotten very popular, but where we see significant performance over peer groups is, just look around you, ask, like, what's the firm down the street offering? What are your competitors offering? If it's $5,000, double it and offer 10,000. And that's where you'll see significant gains in performance. And the reality is or 20. But you think about, my gosh, that's a lot to give an employee, but how much are you going to pay for an external recruiter? And how much does it cost to not have that position filled for 2 more months? Or how much does it cost to lose somebody? And those recruiting programs where you're giving significant cash incentives tend to also resonate more towards the mid to lower levels of the org chart. And those could be tough places to recruit. And those recruiters tend to be better at recruiting diversity.
Interesting. Daphne, do we have any questions from the audience? Time to check
Yeah,
in with
thanks,
you.
Joe, for asking. We actually just had one come in related to DEIB surveys, and they're wondering, is sexual orientation something that is being included on those, or are you encouraging, or, I don't know, Chad, maybe you've got some details on this, on what you're including in the survey work that you're doing, but Lisa, Keith, feel free to jump in as well.
Well, I'm not, is the question just, like, is that an option or
Is it something that you're encouraging to be included in the survey to ask about sexual orientation?
We have some basic, in some of the surveys that we do. And then we customize surveys for firms that we do specifically. And so, some of that customization depends upon the firm and the culture. And again, the things that they're trying to accomplish.
Lisa, what about you? Are you did mention you're using surveys, I think. Is that something that you have?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we definitely have, we do top places to work surveys all the time, and we do internal surveys where we add DEI and B stuff. And we had to work with our, actually our payroll software, because you could only check the either male or female. And we actually got them to add a non-binary. So they can select if they want, but that was probably only within the last year and a half. And we had to work with the software people to say, we'd like to be able to provide that opportunity for somebody to check the box. So So yeah, we do collect that data.
Okay. Keith, do you collect any kind of data from your employees when they're onboarding, or is that something you've not yet gotten to?
No, we have not yet done. I will say, interestingly enough, that whenever I do get a candidate that has a unique, diverse trait, perhaps, I get excited and want to learn more about them to see if they're going to be a good fit, just to help us have this culture where everybody feels welcomed and that they belong. So there's a bigger story behind that, but I don't want to, like, my firm's still small enough where folks could probably figure these things out. So, but yes.
Sure. Daphne, any other questions so far?
Yeah, I know you want to move on to the next section, but this, I think, is relevant to the discussion we just had around referral programs. And any thoughts about whether referral programs run the risk of creating less diversity rather than more diversity, so that I'm assuming, I'm going to refer someone who looks like me, who thinks like me. Any concerns, from that perspective? I don't know, Chad, if you've had any experience with that in the
Well,
groups you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, there could be the risk of that. I think it depends on the level of the job, the role that you're recruiting for. But also, I mean, I think it's kind of like the chicken or the egg thing here. It's like, are we doing better with creating diversity in our firm, and then those ambassadors, if that's a diverse group, tend to then drive a more diverse recruiting and retention culture. So that's a tough one to answer. I mean, I think the answer is, yes and no, but depending upon really the firm itself, where it is today.
It's good perspective.
Yeah.
All right, so I do want to move on to the next section, but if you have other additional questions from the audience, please put your questions in. We'll see how many of those we can get to. So the marketplace section is assessing the organizational approach to marketing and promotional campaigns. And here again, recurring theme, we see an increase, and this is the largest increase of all the 4 sections that we saw year over year. This one went from 50% to 60%. The percentage of aspiring firms fell by 16 points, and the percentage of optimizing firms almost doubled. So this was an area that we saw a lot of improvements. Now, it is a section that has only 3 questions, so that I think may be somewhat behind the increase in the scores, if scores on all 3 of those questions are increasing. On this particular question, we didn't see a huge increase in the score. This is referring to whether your firm includes DEI&B strategies when it pursues work. This is up 4 points overall. In the next section, I have another slide that touches upon this. So we'll kind of come back to this issue in a few minutes. Here we see 85% of firms are always or most of the time reviewing marketing campaigns to ensure they're not offensive. The net on this is up 4 points, but what you see in the percentage of always, that increased by 12 points. So this is really what was driving a lot of the increase in the scores of this section. So this is obviously, I think, a very interesting topic. So I'd like to ask the panelists, and Lisa, let's start off with you here. How does your firm review marketing campaigns to ensure that they are not offensive?
So first of all, you obviously have to have a marketing manager who is sensitive and understands the culture of the company. And we have a woman that's been with us for a long time. She's one of our owners. She does a great job. So I don't have to worry about the information that she's putting out there. And because that's key, quite frankly. And you really have to pay attention to what's being pushed out, because I take our new hires out for a welcome to Niche breakfast after they've been with us for 3 months. So I like to have them have a chance to kind of figure out who we are, understand our culture a little bit, and then I take them out and I ask them a lot about how did you find us, what made you join us, and just to see if we can do a better job in recruiting and onboarding and all that interesting stuff. And to a person, they talk about our website. They always talk about, I found you, or I heard of you, or somebody referred me, because we have a really strong referral policy, Chad, with, like you said, with pretty high numbers if you bring somebody in. But then they go to check us out and they check out our website, and it seems very inclusive, and it's very, and people, it just looks like we're having fun, and it looks like a place where people want to be. And that's all marketing and advertising and what we put out there, right? So I would say that it's extremely important that you have somebody internal that, if I had to review every single thing that went on social media or on our website, then that would be really hard. But if you have, I guess my answer to that would be, if you have a culture that understands what you're doing, what's important, then that will penetrate all of the pieces of the marketing and advertising that you do, just by who you are. If that makes sense.
And Keith, when we were doing our prep call, you have a really great anecdote to share here. What's one of those things that you do when you're marketing your firm?
All right, you set me up, and I don't remember what I told you, but
I think it was your value statement, Keith.
oh yeah. So yeah, let me start by just saying that, you know, our front-facing person, similar to Lisa, is our marketing director. She's kind of like the warrior. And of course, you know, when we interviewed her, we talked about some of the things that we stand for: trust, competence, integrity, character, candor, and she embodied a lot of these things. And so that's the first part of anything that goes out. And right now she's sending out marketing information probably once a week, and I do get a chance to look at it before it goes out. She shoots it to me. I take a quick look at it. Most of the time it's you know, 10 out of 10. So I'm very pleased about that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that that you just brought up, Joe, is that you know, we've had folks from, you know, very rural area in Iowa join us as an intern based off of our value statement on our website. And it's, you know, interesting. I wrote it 4 years ago before I started the company, you know, kind of pinned it, and we were gonna probably get rid of it with our new website that just launched 2 months ago. But I kept hearing so many things about, you know, from other people about our mission statement, our value statement, that we decided to leave it on there. So it's good to know that people are reading that, Lisa.
Definitely do,
but
to a person.
yeah, it's definitely made an impact. And I, you know, when we bring people in, I do ask the same question, like, why us? You know, you have a lot of choices, and so we get to get some data that way.
And don't forget, if I can jump in here a little bit, Joe, is that not only are our, you know, prospective employees looking at what we're pushing out, so is our client base, right? So that's why it's super important to make sure it's reflecting who you are, as it's, like you said, forward facing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously the website is very important. Chad, what are some other things that you're seeing clients do with respect to their marketing, and how they might be reviewing it or ensuring that it is you know, appropriate?
Well, it starts with giving the people that are in charge of marketing a seat at the table. And I'm encouraged by Lisa and Keith's. They provide great examples, but there are plenty of firms that are not doing it as well as they are. And we see this, it's an industry problem. We look at marketing as an overhead function, right? And there's a separation in a lot of firms between strategy, leadership, and there's a missed connection between marketing. And, you know, it's, you know, both Keith and Lisa talked about living the values, but there are so many firms that have these websites that have this uninspired, overused, you know, aged marketing boilerplate that just says the same thing, you know, and they don't bring that stuff to life. And it's so it's a huge problem, because then the marketing folks that have such an impact potentially on the visibility of the brand and how the brand is perceived are either cut off from the strategy the leadership's trying to do, or just simply, just uninformed and unable to make the changes. They're not empowered. I mean, so my encouragement is really make sure that what you're saying as a leader is being reflected and translated to anywhere the brand is visible.
Mhm.
And to do that, you've got to get people in the room. And that's part of starting an inclusive culture, is you got to include all of your leaders, whether they're overhead or on the revenue side.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have a follow-up question for Keith and Lisa. Um, can you share with us an example of when you won a project because of your DEI&B commitment and efforts? Lisa?
Sure. So we were interviewing for a project. We do a lot of higher ed work, and right before the interview, the client actually called the architect. We were doing the civil land development, and said, "Okay, it's great you have all these great subs, but we want to know more about your team makeup." And actually had very specific questions for us. And I'm talking like a couple of years ago at this point, 3 years ago. They wanted to know what our board structure was, what our senior leadership looked like, the overall demographics of the company. I mean, they wanted very specific information around the diversity of our company, and where people were in positions of leadership. It was a very high scoring category for them, and we ended up winning the job with the architect. But it's because we had a very diverse team across the whole team. So that's just one example, but there have been others where private development here in the city's really pushing to make sure it's not just whether you're woman-led, woman-owned, minority-owned, disadvantaged business, but also besides that, that's important, of course, but also what's the makeup of within your company. And so that it's being asked quite frequently. We have definitely won jobs because we look, obviously we do a lot of work in the space and can really add value to the team when they're looking to be selected.
So this, gets at the bottom line here, and I think that's an important point to make. Keith, what about you? Have you experienced any project wins because of your efforts?
Perhaps informally,
Okay.
because I probably didn't get any feedback on the back end, but we get to know our clients, we get to know the procurement people, and we were leaving an interview, and one of the procurement folks say to me, "I'm so glad that you guys had a female in a key personnel position for this interview." And she goes, "I don't get it why these other companies don't do that." She said, she goes, "Don't they know that most of procurement is female?" And it was just pretty interesting. It was a joke probably, but the point is that what probably seems obvious to this group on the screen here is probably not so obvious to folks, that our clients do value diversity, however you want to define it here.
Right.
Yeah, and Keith, I think the other thing, and I think this is more old school, I don't think it happens as much anymore, but if you invite somebody to the interview, because you're trying to look like you have a diverse project team, and they really don't have a role either speaking or on the project, we used to call that window dressing. I'm not going to, as a female, I'm not going to an interview to be window dressing at the interview. And I think we're beyond that. I think the industry's moved beyond that, but yeah, if you want to show a diverse team, the procurement team is looking for the people that are actually doing the work. And so if you have a diverse company, then it's easy to make sure that you do that. So.
Yep.
Right. Yep. All right. So I want to move on to the last section, so we have time to talk about a couple of really key questions I have for you all. This is the supplier community section, which assesses the organizational approach to engaging diverse members of the community. So here we also saw a really positive increase in scores by 7 points on average. We saw the number of aspiring firms decline to 72%. That's a 15-point drop. The number of emerging firms nearly doubled. So again, we saw some really good improvements in this section. We ask a question about when pursuing public work, is your firm asked to articulate its commitment to DEI&B? This increased by 13 points when you add together the always and the often. 13 points. So that's a pretty big jump. We do ask a separate question about private work when you're pursuing private work, and it's a much lower percentage, but it did increase by a few percentage points as well. But it's clearly being driven more by public work than it is by private work. And then we also ask, how is your firm supporting DEI&B related interests in the community? We see here some areas have improved. A couple areas actually saw slight declines. So the number one area is volunteering employee time and labor in community projects that impact underserved populations. That decreased by 2 points, but it's still the number one way that firms are engaging with the community. Sponsoring DEI&B related programs, that increased. Providing financial resources to support DEIB related interests, that increased. We saw a big increase in terms of sponsoring scholarships for underrepresented populations. I think that's very, very good news there. So obviously, lots of different ways that firms are engaging in the community. What I want to ask the panel in the interest of time here is a really key question. I always say that we're trying to keep politics out of this area. We're trying to really focus on the firm and making firms successful. But obviously, we live in the world around us and are affected by what's happening in the world around us. And so I wanted to ask you three panelists, what do you all think will happen in the next year when it comes to DEI&B as a result of what may be perceived as a shift in the political climate? Is that going to affect what you do, and how are you going to keep it from affecting your firm? Keith, I'd like to start with you.
Very simple, Joe. Our value and our missions statement will not change. Although we don't explicitly call out the use of DEI&B on our website, it aligns with our goals and objectives, which again is to be the most preferred company for employers and employees and our clients. And so with that, I mean, our commitment is not going to change. It's who we are. What we are prepared to do is navigate and pivot and do whatever we need to do to stay relevant in a new administration. We'll figure out what that is in 2 months.
Okay. Lisa?
Yeah, I would say ditto for sure. We've had actually a lot of conversations around that at our EDI council. And what I tell our team is we are who we are. We're committed to our values and our mission and how we operate. And we need to continue to focus on our circle of influence. What can we do within the confines of niche engineering, internally and externally? What can we do to help make sure that what we think is important is what we're projecting, and making sure that people understand that. But like Keith said, is that it's basically, we don't know what it's going to be, and it's going to be, but that's this whole, we're always constantly pivoting and figuring out what we need to do. And obviously, if the laws change, we have to make sure that we run a business that's within the confines of the law. So right now we have an underrepresented scholarship named after our founder. I'm not going to change that until someone tells me I can't do that. So we're just going to stick to what we're doing until it's really, we're forced to do otherwise, if that happens.
Yeah. So Chad, you might have a broader perspective on this, and we actually got a question from the audience just as I was asking the question. We've seen firms or companies like Walmart saying they're pulling back. What do you think is going to happen within the industry? And are you still seeing firms say, yep, we're committed and we're as committed as ever? Or are you seeing firms asking you, hey, should we be looking at this differently?
Yeah, well, there's little dispute that the brand of DEI has taken a hit, but I think the broader perspective has the importance of recruiting and retention in this industry decreased? Absolutely not. Has the importance of creating companies that better reflect the communities they serve decreased? Absolutely not. And I think it's important that as a leader, you define what you're trying to do. I think to Keith's point, they're not saying DE&I on their website, but yet the firm itself, the culture, the way they're operating reflects that. So what I would say is, as a leader, you can and should create the narrative around anything the company is doing, anything that's important. You create the messaging to change
Yeah.
the narrative that, yes, unfortunately can be influenced by media, the government, or any outside party, but not saying it, that's easy.
Mhm.
But, doing nothing or little puts others in control. So I think you got to control the narrative and explain the why behind why you're doing what you're doing.
I think it's really interesting that you all have said, we're not changing what we're doing. We're not changing the way we talk about it, but we don't necessarily label it publicly as DEI or DEIMB. And I think that, there may be some changes, I think, in terms of the branding and how we talk about it, because it has become very polarizing. I don't think that is but any intention of and shouldn't impact, the work that we're all doing. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. I wish we had more time today. I want to thank all of the panelists, Keith, Chad, and Lisa. Thank you so much. And also, if you would like to access the report, you can do so through the ACEC Research Institute website, but this QR code will take you straight to it. So this will give you a shortcut to it. I'd also like to throw it back over to Daphne for closing remarks.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for leading us through a great discussion. Keith, Chad, Lisa, thank you so much for all of your insights. I do want to also thank Chad and the Zweig Group for their support on this diversity roadmap. Without that support, it would not be possible. So thank you, Chad, for your leadership in that. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you back here in January with a new series for the Future of Engineering Roundtables. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.